Dana Brajachanarandana Jasodanandana Brajachanarandana Jamana Tiravana Chadi Jamuna Tiravana Chadi Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jayom Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivajagacharya Astatara Satasya Srimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnavin Raj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Gaura Premanandi Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya We'll be reading this morning from Canto 10, Chapter 35, verses 12 and 13. We just have two short remaining commentaries, and then we're going to go on to the next two verses. Just as a reminder, this is a celebrated section of Srimad Bhagavatam. It's the Gopis' mood of separation from Krishna during the daytime when Krishna goes out to take care of the cows. And so to pacify themselves, amongst themselves, they discuss. And sometimes the next verses, they'll go to Mother Jasoda and express to Mother Jasoda their feelings of wonders of Krishna, because they know that Mother Jasoda is also feeling separation from Krishna, so they commiserate. They go to share their feelings with her. The first verse of the chapter is an introductory verse, the flute song, and then each of the other verses in the chapter, it's in pairs. Something speaking about Krishna's flute playing, and then the next verse is who is affected, who is stimulated in ecstatic love by Krishna's flute playing. That's how the chapter is set up. So here's Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, his commentary on these two verses. Texts 12 and 13 of chapter 35. He writes, having described the joy which the conscious and unconscious entities on earth felt from hearing the flute, the Gopis now describe the bliss of the unconscious entities in the sky. Saha Bala means accompanied by Balaram and a troop of cowherd boys. Krishna looked gorgeous as he playfully draped garlands on the top of his head, on his chest, and as ornaments over his ears. Krishna stood on the slope of a mountain and joyfully vibrated his flute to inundate the universe with bliss. Paragraph. The clouds in the sky began to rumble gently so that their sound would not disrupt the great cloud of Krishna. The thundering of the clouds blended favorably with the flute sound, not disturbing it in any way. The cloud was a dear friend, Suhridam, of Krishna, because both are of dark color and both act to remove people's distress. The cloud then sprinkled fine particles of ice, which were just like tiny flowers, and made an umbrella, prata patram, from its own shadow to relieve his friend from the scorching heat of the sun. Prata patram means that which delivers trayate from intense heat, pra tapa. Paragraph. Here we can understand that Krishna is the cloud standing on the slope of the mountain. His garland and earrings are the cranes flying in the sky. Excuse me. His garland, yes, and earrings. His garland and earrings. So on his head, on his neck and chest, and on his ears. His garland and earrings are the cranes flying in the sky. His yellow dhoti is the lightning. This is Krishna as a cloud. And the song of his flute is the rain showering the essence of delicious nectar. And very short is Jiva Goswami's Kramasandarbha, where he writes, O goddesses of Vraja, when Krishna is enjoying himself with Balaram on the mountain slopes, charming in appearance with a flower crown, he gives joy to all with the resonant vibrations of his flute. Thus he delights the entire world. At that time, the nearby cloud, afraid of offending a great personality, thunders very gently an accompaniment. The cloud showers flowers onto his dear friend and shades him from the sun like an umbrella. And now we're moving on to text 14:15, chapter 35. The translation reads, O pious Mother Yashoda, your son, who is expert in all the arts of herding cows, has invented many new styles of flute playing. When he takes his flute to his bimba-red lips and sends forth the tones of the harmonic scale in variegated melodies, Brahma, Shiva, Indra, and other chief demigods become confused upon hearing the sound. Although they are the most learned authorities, they cannot ascertain the essence of that music, and thus they bow down their heads and hearts. So going back, our commentators say these are not consecutive, rather Shukadeva Goswami is speaking, Vyasadeva is writing from at different times, in different days, in different circumstances. These are gathered together collection of what the gopis, how they spend their time during the day. So on this occasion, we'll hear they went to Mother Jasoda, or they were thinking of Mother Jasoda in their mind and thus addressing her in this way. So here's the purport, the BBT purport. The words Tava Sutaha Sati, or your son, O chaste lady, clearly indicates that at this point, Mother Yashoda is among the young gopis as they earnestly describe Krishna's glories. According to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti, among the demigods, led by Shakra, or Lord Indra, were Upendra, Agni, and Yamaraj. Among those led by Sharva, or Lord Shiva, were Katyayani, Skanda, and Ganesha. And among those led by Parameshti, or Lord Brahma, were the four Kumaras and Narada. Thus, the best collective intelligence in the universe could not definitively analyze the enchanting musical arrangement of the Supreme Lord. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur writes, in the afternoon, the gopis, thinking of how to get continuous sight of Krishna, went to Mother Yashoda's house. They mixed with the elders, young girls and children, and talked about Krishna's qualities and activities. Yashoda listened and then spoke. In order to console Yashoda, who was feeling separation from her son, and also to appease their own minds, they began describing to her the power of the flute's song. Paragraph. Oh, Yashoda, when your son, who is skillful at herding the cows, caring for them and milking them, holds the flute to his red lips and plays the various jatis, which is a word for melodies, 18 chief ones, numbering in the thousands, which were self-taught. All the devatas, including Indra, along with Upendra, Agni, and others, Shiva, along with Katyayani, Kartikeya, and Ganesha, and Brahma, along with the four Kumaras, Narada, and others, as well as composers of songs, hear that song, and, tasting the sweetness of the song, bow down their shoulders and minds. But they cannot comprehend the raga and tala. They become completely bewildered by the sweetness of the song and lose their sense of judgment. If the devatas become bewildered, what can we say of ordinary mortals? Your son bewilders the whole universe. Jiva Goswami writes, a devoted group of listeners is addressed. Yashoda, included in that group, is also praised during the narration of pastimes. The gopis speak of the flute with its special effects, even influencing her. When she worries about her son returning late, when the afternoon passes, the gopis, while worrying why he is late, console her and encourage her by describing his absorption in skillful, astonishing pastimes, while hiding their own rasa with him. Parentheses, Vatsalya rasa and Madhurya rasa do not mix well. By desiring that he returns quickly, they also secretly hope to extinguish their own absorption in him. But they hide their sentiments for him by describing him clearly as if they were ordinary people. Paragraph. He is skillful at cowherd activities. By these general activities, he attracts everyone. Most attractive, with the flute placed on his red lips, he plays srara jatis, or tunes, in which he has invented his own many ways of playing the flute. He has produced many ways of playing the flute by his own invention, using the notes. He has invented his own svara jatis, which are plentiful in his music. Oh, Yashoda, respected by the universe, Sati. Because of your nature, the flute song of your son, being respected by the universe, is natural to him. This verse continues from the previous verse, which describes how the flute gives joy to the universe. So if you remember from yesterday, in describing the cloud and how it affects not just the cloud but the universe, his flute playing gives pleasure to the universe. And here they're saying, because you, Yashoda, are famous throughout the universe, it's natural that your son is able to influence the universe. They're honoring her and thus indirectly honoring him. Paragraph. The Devatas hear this sound while situated in their abodes. The sound ends up spreading everywhere. The best Devatas who are endowed with great musical knowledge from the Gandharvas, who are skillful at music themselves, Kavayaha, Indra along with the Lokapalas, Shiva and his family of Durga, Skanda, and Ganesha, and Brahma and his associates like Kumaras, Nard, the seven sages, and the Prajapatis, they all listened because of the unique sound of his flute playing. First, Indra and his associates are mentioned because they hear with their external senses. Though Shiva is situated on Kailash, he hears next because of his great concentration. Since Brahma is furthest away, he is mentioned last. Their hearts become submissive on hearing, since they cannot understand this sound. Even one note is completely different from anything they have heard. Because of the sweetness of the sound of the flute, they become faint-hearted, kashmalam. Savana shaha means the low, middle, and high pitches, or it can mean, quote, repeatedly hearing. Anishchita tattvam can mean they wonder, what is this song from a flute so astonishingly sweet? What is this most astonishing sound which has never previously been heard? Or, what is this magical sound which completely bewilders? By this bewilderment, becoming completely absorbed in the sound, they forget everything. Kashmalam ya yuhuhu. Sanatana Goswami writes, as the gopis are singing, suddenly Yashoda comes. Or, as they sing, they think of her great devotion to Krishna in their minds and call out to her. In describing his excellence, they show how Brahma and other powerful, wise persons become bewildered by the sound of this flute and his pastimes, experienced as most astonishing. 2 verses describe this. He is skillful at playing with cowherds, both while herding and not herding the cows. When he plays the flute, on his lips and produces sounds. Since the cowherds relish the flute playing, he gives teachings in an extraordinary manner as the crest jewel of cowherds. Parashara says, from Vishnu Purana, Gopa, Venu, Pravadakau, Krishna and Balaram both play cowherd flutes. Playing the flute is sometimes done to show skill in playing as a cowherd. At noon, it is done to give joy to the universe. He places the flute on his red lower lip. This indicates his sweetness and beauty. In describing his excellence to his mother, the gopis hide their bhava. To satisfy Yashoda, they compare his lips to the bimba fruit. Oh, Yashoda, worshipped by the world, Sati, this is quite suitable for your son. Situated in their own places, the Devatas hear the sound. As Devatas, they're familiar with a wealth of songs sung by the Gandharvas and others. Indra, Shiva, and Brahma, in order of importance here. Brahma gives birth to Shiva. Others, such as the Lokapalas, are also present. Garuda and other associates of the Lord are present. Their hearts are submissive, anata. They become bewildered, kashmalam. They are not able to determine the notes since they were different. The nature of the flute sound is thus bewildering. Paragraph. In playing the flute, he produces plentiful notes, putting the flute to his lip. Coming close, the Devatas listen. The gopis attempt to increase Yashoda's belief in his attractive nature with the possibility of seeing him. As Devatas, Brahma, and others have great intelligence, the best yogis, Kavayaha, like the Kumaras also, bow down their hearts and shoulders. Coming from their places, seeing Krishna, they show humility in front of him. They are not able to understand with certainty about their own selves, anishtita tatvaha, because the flute has stolen their hearts. Paragraph. They are not certain if Brahman is the only truth. They cannot discern what is real because of his flute playing, for his flute playing is endowed with the highest bliss. Or, because the flute playing is so attractive, they forget about the bliss of Brahman. Quote, "What is this song from a flute, so astonishingly sweet? What is this most astonishing sound which has never previously been heard?" Or, "What is this magical sound which completely bewilders?" By this bewilderment, becoming completely absorbed in that sound, they forget everything. Kashmalam yayuhu. And one more. Vishwanath writes, late in the afternoon, some gopis presented logical reasons why their beloved, who was supposed to be returning to Vraja at this time, had remained absent from their sight for so long. On some pretext, they went to Mother Yashoda's house and mixed with the elders, young girls, and children to talk about Krishna's transcendental qualities, activities, and power. Mother Yashoda listened intently and also related numerous pastimes of her darling son. In order to pacify Yashoda, who was becoming overwhelmed with separation from Krishna, and to appease their own minds, the gopis told her about the power of Krishna's flute song in this verse. The gopis said, "Oh, Yashoda, your son is expert at herding the cows, caring for them, and milking them. He holds the flute to his cherry red lips and plays the tones of the harmonic scale in variegated melodies, which were all self-taught. When all the demigods, led by Shakra, Lord Indra, accompanied by Upendra, Agni, and Yamaraj, and those led by Sharva, Lord Shiva, such as Katyayani, Skanda, and Ganesha, and those led by Parameshti, Lord Brahma, such as the four Kumaras and Narada, as well as the best composers of songs, hear that song and taste its sweetness. They bow down their necks and minds, incapable of comprehending the raga and tala. They become completely bewildered by the dulit. Excuse me, it's dul set. It's a nice word, whoever translated this one. That means pleasing to the ear. By the pleasing to the ear flute song, dulcet flute song, and lose their ability to understand the real identity of the musical scales. If such illustrious demigods become bewildered, then what can we say of ordinary mortals? In this way, your son bewilders the whole universe. One more. There's a lot more, but one more. This is reference to this verse is made in Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary during the fight between Krishna and Chandra and Mushtaka. So that's chapter 44. So it's early in the fight. It's text 3. And the text reads, "They each struck fists against fists, knees against knees, head against head, and chest against chest." That's the verse. His commentary, Aratni refers to making a fist with all the fingers except the little finger. Wrestling with such a pair of fists is very difficult and thus unheard of, whereas wrestling is generally done with open hands. Nevertheless, just as Krishna invented new ways of playing on the flute, as stated, Venuvadya Urudha Nija Shiksha, that's this verse, he also fought in this novel way with great skill. Though Chanura experienced great difficulty with this, he accepted this style out of pride in his own ability as a heroic wrestler. How nice to embellish all this. And tomorrow we'll begin with, I'll just make this gloss over it because we read it before. In Brahma's prayers, chapter 14, this is chapter 11, chapter 35. And going way back to chapter 14 in Brahma's prayers, he speaks about, Brahma speaks about how he, Lord Shiva, and the demigods in charge of the senses, which goes back to Canto 3, where there's demigods overseeing the power of the senses. The demigods feel themselves blessed because of the exalted position of the residents of Vrindavan, and how the residents of Vrindavan, with their senses, they can directly experience Krishna's sweet pastimes. But the demigods, are removed and don't have that power. But they say, Brahma says, the residents of Vrindavan grant the power to the demigods to remotely experience the ecstasy of Krishna's pastimes. So it's fascinating. It's just one more time. That Brahma is saying, I, Lord Shiva, and the demigods in charge of the senses are blessed by the residents of Vrindavan with the power to experience Krishna's pastimes, because material senses can't experience Krishna's pastimes in the sweetness that they have. But the Vrijbasis can. They're more exalted than us, the demigods in charge of the senses, and they grant us the power to also experience the sweetness of Krishna's pastimes. They're very merciful. So we'll discuss this tomorrow because it's a little involved, how it works that material senses, we'll go through it tomorrow in detail, but material senses don't function without the power of the demigods to animate and activate those senses. So there, let's say here's an ear. That's an organ. And the organ is different than the subtle power of sense, hearing. And then yet a third thing is the demigods that can extend power to the power of hearing so that the ear can receive sounds. And the Vrijbasis don't require demigods. Those on the transcendental platform don't need the sanction of demigods to hear or see or smell or touch, etc. Their senses are spiritual. Although they have bodies, because of their bhakti, they're completely cleansed from material contamination, and they can experience Krishna to their heart's content. And then the rest of us, we can't. We can see the deity, we can chant the holy name, etc. We can use our senses, and it's purifying to contact the deity and the sound vibration and the flowers offered to Krishna and so forth. But the fullness is not experienced by us. It's purifying, but the fullness is not experienced by us because we're still on this material platform of experience. But the Vrijbasis are not. That's what the teaching tells us, what Brahma is saying in this chapter 14. But they're very merciful. So they have granted the power to Brahma and the other devatas in controlling of the senses to experience the sweetness of Krishna's pastimes by the mercy of the residents of Braja. So similarly, we require mercy, right? It's not just effort. Effort is essential, and mercy is essential. Both are essential. And the good news is the Vrijbasis are very merciful, and our acharyas are very merciful, and the sad news is we're not so enthusiastic. Well, yeah, we're enthusiastic, but not so enthusiastic. And that's what we'll be discussing tomorrow morning, starting with the festival of the Holy Name and the place of enthusiasm, yearning, enthusiasm, and spontaneous. So let's see if there's some discussion in the room, and then we'll go to online. Anyone in the room would like to discuss something?
Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Maharaj, we see there are descriptions of pastime in Srimad Bhagavatam, how Lord Krishna is performing his pastimes. But as we read the commentaries given by the acharyas, there are like more details of the pastimes, which are not there in the Srimad Bhagavatam.
Yeah.
So how that happens, like they actually get vision of the pastime, like how they describe the details of very minute details, like which is not there in the Bhagavatam.
Let me say back what I think you're asking. There's the Bhagavatam pastime, and then there's the Acharya's description of the pastime. That's a little different from one Acharya, the next Acharya, the next Acharya. How does that work? That's your question?
Yeah, that is
How to
my,
understand why there's variegatedness in their explanations of things.
that is also my question. That is like second question I was going to ask. The first question is like how they get the vision of the pastimes.
How do we do what?
How they get the vision of the pastimes, like
How do you get the vision of the
how they
pastimes?
describe the minute details which is there in the
How do
pastime.
they or how do we get that vision?
How they get
How
and
do they get the vision?
and how they describe the minute details of the pastime, which is not there in the
Okay.
Bhagavatam.
There's two answers to your first question. One answer to your first question is, in some cases they're describing according to the Sanskrit. The Sanskrit can be rendered, authentically this way, that way, another way. So they're giving the various renderings that are consistent with the nature of Krishna, one who stimulates ecstatic love is the nature of Krishna. So there are different renderings that align with the essence of the whole of the Bhagavatam, the essence of Krishna. So they're just saying it can be read this way, it can be read that way, it can be read another way. But their interpretations, or those, it can be read this way, that way, the other way, are consistent with the essence of the Bhagavatam, not otherwise. In other words, there could be other renderings of the Sanskrit that don't align with Krishna's nature, so they don't mention those. They're mentioning, so that's one. It's just the Sanskrit terms can mean different things. And then a second, how do they envision details? There's a second that is, it's a technical answer, but there is a phrase that our acharyas use, swa rasaki, which means they can enter into the pastimes through their elevated consciousness and through mantra. Like, for example, the six Goswamis, particularly Rupa and Sanatan, were assigned by Lord Caitanya to re-establish lost places of Krishna's pastimes. So how do you do that? Because the places are lost, the pastimes are there. So how do you re-establish the places? So they're connected to Super Soul, and they would go to the place, and they would recite, the vicinity, and recite and absorb themselves, and they would actually experience the pastimes and establish this is where this pastime, that's where that pastime. One that I like very much is Raghunath Das Goswami, who I'm sure, as you know, after he left Puri, he made his residence in Radhakund, and he stayed there for the balance of his life. So one of his writings, there's two of his writings. One of his writings is Malyahari Kund, or the Pearl Pastime. You're familiar with that, right? Not familiar. Yes? No? Kind of? No. There's a pond a little distant from Radhakund where Raghunath Das wrote a little book in detail describing a pastime that isn't described in the Bhagavatam. And how did he access that? Swarasaki. He experienced the pastime. And he wrote a book about it. How? This is responding to your question. By his elevated consciousness, he not only, he entered into the pastime. He didn't just visualize something or had a dream about something. There was a pastime that he entered into. And then he wrote a book about it. And there's another pastime, a celebrated pastime, of Krishna's tax, Leela. Have you been to Vrindavan? Yeah. So you've been around Govardhan Hill. So just after you pass Govardhan town, and you start going down this long stretch where there's no shops, Govardhan is over to the right. And the Pandas, they're very enthusiastic to have you come and take a look at the footprint of Radharani in a stone, in the Govardhan Shila. And when you go there next time, you'll remember this. So it's at that place that there's a book written by Raghunath Das Goswami, who's not, a fiction writer, describes very elaborately a pastime of Krishna extracting taxes from the gopis, right there. Details and details and details and details that are not found in the Bhagavatam. So how did he get those details, which is your question? He experienced the pastime, and he wrote a book about it. It's very interesting. Danakeli, the pastime of Krishna's tax pastimes, right there. So, that going back to, we're reading, so how do they know? In some cases, it's these two options. In some cases, they're really definitive, but it can be read this way, that way, this is the way. But it doesn't mean that someone else that has another understanding or another experience, because Krishna's pastimes are variegated. Is that okay? Now the second question was, remind me?
Second question is like how different acharyas describe the pastime in different way.
Because the pastimes are variegated. Prabhupada explains like this. Variety is the mother of enjoyment. You've heard that phrase? So using Prabhupada's terms, there's a spool. My understanding is he was using that in terms of film. The old procedure for film was slides and slides and slides and slides, slightly moving, slightly moving, slightly moving. And then you put it through a projector and then it shows movement. But so the spool is, the thing that holds the film. So Krishna's pastimes are like a spool. There's a theme, but the theme has variety, sometimes and sometimes, because that's the mother of enjoyment. So he knows how to enjoy. So there's a theme or a stirring of a particular emotion. So there's a theme to that stirring of that particular emotion, and it's done in different ways because there's variety. He's enjoying, his enjoyment is unlimited and all expansive. It's not hackneyed, it's got to do the same thing again and again. There's variegatedness. And his pastimes are eternal, so that's how it can be a different rendering. It's some understanding about Krishna Tattva, and by understanding Krishna Tattva, we can reconcile sometimes and sometimes. It's described this way, sometimes described that way. The variegatedness of Krishna as he's enjoying, and they're understanding and appreciating his enjoyment in different ways. Because it's different. There's variety. The best of enjoyers is not bored with stereotyped, hackneyed reruns. Anything else? Or we'll do online questions.
This is Sucharita Devidasi. First question, she has two questions. These days in obituaries, people are saying...
These days what?
In obituaries, they are saying, people are saying, until we meet on the other side. Is there any truth in thinking one gets to meet dead friends, family, once he or she leaves body?
I didn't get it. I'm sorry. Just say it without reading it. Just say it without reading it.
She's saying that...
Who's the person?
Sucharita.
Okay.
She's saying that nowadays people say, when somebody leaves the body, until we meet in the other world. Does it mean that...
The soul leaves the body and they go somewhere.
Other world.
Somewhere.
So does it mean that we will meet our dead friends and family members once we leave this body in the other world?
Well, they're certainly going to go somewhere, but it's not just because you're a family member, they go to Krishna. It depends on, what their mind is fixed on at the time of death, which has everything to do with guna and karma. And, the baggage that they're carrying from material contact. That's going to determine where they go. Now, the well-wishing of you as a family member or a friend or, offering prayers to Krishna, that's not a 0, but it's not a 10 either. It's up to Krishna based upon whatever Krishna decides. And then Krishna's decision may be delegated to others depending upon the circumstance. Karmana daiva netrena. That is, demigods decide with the authority of Krishna to decide their next destination.
Her second question. Is it mentioned in the scriptures how the Vrajavasis or Nanda Maharaj or Yashoda Ma dealt with separation from Krishna?
How they dealt with it?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're just reading the whole section. The Gopis are how they dealt with it. And then they're going to Mother Jasoda, who's also, I'm feeling separation from Krishna. And it's late, she's looking at her watch saying, he should be back by now. And one moment seems like 10 years or more, and all that. So their feeling, their experience is described. We're reading it. It's intense. The feelings intensify, and then they remember their exchanges with Krishna or others' exchanges with Krishna or his greatness as their intensity of feelings increase through feelings of separation.
Next question is from Radha, Atulya's daughter. If Rajavasis do not need demigods for their functioning, then why were they worshipping Indra for getting rain to grow grains?
Nice question. Very thoughtful question. They're followers of Dharma. Although they're on the platform of spontaneous love, they don't neglect Dharma. And those who are followers of Dharma, they honor those who they receive things from in an appropriate manner. So they received sufficient rain, so their crops and the grasses for the cows were sufficiently supplied through rain. And so they're offering items that were produced from the rain that Indra supplied to Indra. They're following Dharma. They don't need anything, but they're followers of Dharma out of gratitude.
Sanchari, why doesn't the Madhva Sampradaya accept Srimati Radharani's position?
Why other sampradayas do not?
Madhva Sampradaya
Why they don't?
accept Srimati Radharani's position.
By the way, Sanchari's mom and dad are from the Madhva Sampradaya. My understanding is not crystal clear, but my understanding goes like this. They understand the Shakti of Shaktiman, or the potency of the Supreme Lord, is within. Just like, similar to Mahavishnu, we don't see Mahavishnu with Lakshmi, because Lakshmi is within, and they're enjoying eternal pastimes in this yoga nidra state. So my understanding is they worship in that way, that Shakti is within Shaktiman. And so they don't worship Shakti along with Shaktiman, they just worship as they worship forms of the Lord. The temples in Udupi are Madhva's temples, and it's the central temple being Udupi Krishna. And my understanding of their understanding is the Shakti is within, and so it's included. Similar to worship of Shalagram Shila, there's no Shakti along with Shalagram. Shalagram is Narayana. And when they worship Shalagram or Narayana, the Shakti is included, because there's Shakti-Shaktiman relationship always within. That's my understanding.
Next question is from Sri Radhika. Is it true that the only suitable boat for going back to Godhead is the human form of life, and that the demigods wait to take birth on the earth for this reason? It is hard to believe that Lord Brahma, the preceptor of our sampradaya and the most qualified devotee, is awaiting a human birth to go back to Godhead.
Well, you're right. The initial question is it true that? The answer is no. One can go directly from Brahma or Brahmaloka to the spiritual world. You don't have to come back to the earthly planet and then go to the Krishna Loka, or the spiritual world. It's not so. But Brahma's aspiration was not take a human birth. Brahma's aspiration was any form at all where dust from any of the residents of Vrindavan can fall upon his head. So that's Brahma's aspiration, to get the mercy of the residents of Vrindavan that way. And it doesn't require human form to do that.
This is Radha Vallabhadas. Oh no, there is Amara. First question is from Amara. Gopis are Krishna's eternal associates. Srila Rupa Goswami is Rupa Manjari in Krishna Leela, but he is born in the material world. Was he perfected through sadhana, or he knew of his identity as a gopi?
Well, I think you'd have to ask him what he knew about his identity. And one could speculate this way, and one could speculate that way. But whether he understood his position actually, I mean, Bhaktivinoda Thakur expresses by mature stage of his sadhana, understanding of his name, his form, his services, etc. So one could assume, certainly Rupa Goswami must also have known, but I don't know of any scriptural reference that said what he knew and what he didn't know about his eternal spiritual identity. So no need to speculate.
Radha Vallabhadas, as per class, the Vrajavasis empower the senses of demigods, Brahma, etc. to connect to lords. Some typo, I don't know. Anyway, maybe he can type again. Sanchari's question. From my understanding, demigods appear for all of Krishna's more establishing of dharma pastimes. Did the demigods appear in Mahaprabhu's Leela as well, since he appeared more to give mercy? I didn't understand. Should I read one more time? From my understanding, demigods appear for all of Krishna's more establishing of dharma pastimes. Oh, they appear for during Krishna's pastimes, the demigods. What she's asking is, the demigods appear during Krishna's pastimes. Did they also appear during Mahaprabhu's pastimes?
That's her question.
Yeah, that's
sure.
okay.
And their experience, don't use three-dimensional space to describe what happened. Like they hung out a sign at their heavenly planet saying, "Excuse me, I'm out to lunch. I'm going to go take part in Krishna's pastimes now," and they vacated and things stopped until Krishna's pastimes ended. Or don't think of it like that. How they participated, the best I've read is partial expansions of them appeared along with and in association with the eternal associates of Krishna or Caitanya Mahaprabhu.
Okay, trying to. Satish Bhatnagar, Hare Krishna, Brahma's one moment is like a year in terms of earthly time. How much is Krishna's one moment equal in terms to earthly time?
How did Krishna's one moment compare to worldly time?
Earthly time, yeah.
That's what he's asking.
Yes.
Well, Krishna's very flexible. He can make time work however he wants time to work. For example, Krishna can move from Nandagram to the Kaliya lake in a flash. Now for us to move from Nandagram to Kaliya Ghat or vice versa, it takes some time. But Krishna doesn't need, time is very flexible for his pastimes. It's under his direction, and it can take a long time, short time, whatever he wants. So think of Krishna's experience of time that way. It's entirely under his control to facilitate his pastimes effortlessly.
Radha Vallabhadas, as per class, the Vrajavasis empower the senses of demigods, like Brahma, etc., to connect to the Lord's pastimes on a deeper level. Is our understanding correct that our acharyas are Vrajavasis and their writings have potencies to connect us ecstatic pastimes based on our purification / enthusiasm?
As far, I think I've understood the question, and the answer is yes. And we're going to be discussing this extensively tomorrow, so tune in. Oops, not tomorrow. It's going to be Monday. We'll discuss this extensively on Monday, so stay tuned Monday morning if you're interested in hearing this more thoroughly described. So we're done.
Yes,
Anything else? Srila Prabhupada ki? Jai.